The day that should have been the happiest of our lives turned into a nightmare that I will never forget. The sun shone brightly over Valencia, and the scent of orange blossom filled the air as Daniel and I approached our new house. After years of saving and planning, we finally had our own home, a beautiful chalet on the outskirts of the city. "Can you believe it, baby? It's finally ours," I exclaimed, squeezing Daniel's hand excitedly as we walked down the driveway. Daniel smiled back at me, his eyes shining with the same excitement as mine. "We've made it, my love. Our little paradise." We opened the front door, the squeak of the hinges sounding like music to our ears. The hallway was bathed in light, the walls freshly painted a soft cream shade we had chosen together. I could perfectly imagine where we would place each piece of furniture, each painting, each memory of our life together. "Let's go see the garden," I proposed, pulling Daniel's hand towards the back of the house. We went out to the terrace and were amazed by the view. A small oasis of green awaited us, with a lemon tree in one corner and enough space for the garden we had always dreamed of having. We were so absorbed in our bubble of happiness that we didn't hear the sound of a taxi stopping in front of the house. It wasn't until we heard the unmistakable sound of suitcase wheels on the pavement that we turned around, confused. And there she was. Olivia, my mother-in-law, dragging not one, but two enormous suitcases toward our front door. My heart stopped for a moment, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "what's your mother doing here?" My husband seemed as surprised as I was. "I have no idea," he replied, his voice tinged with concern. We hurried toward the entrance, arriving just as Olivia reached the door. She was wearing one of her signature designer outfits, although I noticed it looked a little wrinkled, as if she'd traveled in it. "Mom!" Daniel exclaimed, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here? We didn't expect to see you today." Olivia snorted, as if the question were absurd. "What am I doing here? Can't I come see my son's new house?" I felt my stomach turn. He knew that tone of Olivia's well. It was the prelude to something bigger, more complicated. "Of course you can, Olivia," I interjected, trying to stay calm. "It's just that you caught us by surprise. We just arrived ourselves." Olivia looked me up and down, with that look that always made me feel inadequate. "Ah, Carmen, dear. You're here too." I had to bite my tongue not to respond. Where else would I be, if not in my own home? "Well, aren't you guys going to help me with my bags?" Olivia asked, pointing to her luggage as if we were her personal butlers. Daniel, always the obedient son, hurried to grab the suitcases. I stood paralyzed, watching my mother-in-law enter our house as if she owned the place. I followed her inside, feeling my dream crumble with every step I took. My, Olivia commented, examining the hallway critically. "They've done a decent job with the decor. Although, of course, there's a lot of room for improvement." I felt my blood start to boil. We had spent months planning every detail, every color, every piece of furniture. How dare he criticize him like that? "Mom," Daniel interjected, noticing my expression, "why didn't you tell us you were coming? We could have picked you up at the airport." Olivia waved her hand, as if to dismiss it. "Oh, I didn't want to bother you. Besides, I wanted to give you a surprise." Wow, he had achieved it. A surprise that threatened to ruin the most important day of our lives. "And how long do you plan to stay, Olivia?" I asked, trying not to let my voice betray my growing anxiety. That's when my mother-in-law dropped the bomb that rocked my world. "You mean how long we'll stay, my dear?" he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "After all, I will live here with you now." The silence that followed that statement was deafening. I looked at Daniel, searching his eyes for any sign that this was a bad joke, but all I saw was confusion and panic. "What do you mean you'll live here?" I finally managed to articulate. Olivia looked at me like I was stupid. "Exactly what I said, Carmen. This will be my new home too." I felt the ground opening beneath my feet. Our house, our shelter, our dream, everything was turning into a nightmare in a matter of minutes. "But Mom," Daniel began, his voice shaking, "we hadn't talked about this. Carmen and I bought this house for ourselves." "Oh, honey," Olivia responded with a condescending tone that made me want to scream, I knew you wouldn't mind. After all, I'm your mother. I turned around, unable to continue watching the scene. Through the window, I saw the garden that minutes before had filled me with excitement. It seemed to mock me now, a cruel reminder of the dreams that were shattering before my eyes. The sound of suitcase wheels on the wooden floor brought me back to reality. Olivia was walking up the stairs, dragging her luggage as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm going to settle in," he announced. "I'm sure they have a lot to process." And with that, he disappeared upstairs, leaving Daniel and I in a state of absolute shock. I turned to my husband, searching for answers, comfort, anything that would make sense of what was happening. But Daniel looked as lost as I did, his face a mix of confusion and guilt. "Carmen, he began, but the words seemed to fail him. "No," I cut him off, raising a hand. "Don't say anything. I can't process this right now." I walked out into the garden, needing air, space, anything to get me away from the nightmare that our perfect day had become. The orange blossom aroma that had previously seemed so sweet now turned my stomach. As I sat on a stone bench, hiding my face in my hands, I couldn't help but wonder, how had we come to this? How had our new beginning become so twisted? The sound of Daniel's footsteps approaching made me look up. His expression was a mix of worry and regret. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, sitting down next to me. "I promise you." I wanted to believe him. I really wanted to believe that we could get through this, that our new life wasn't doomed before it began. But as the sun set over Valencia, turning the sky orange and pink, I couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning of our problems. The day that should have been the happiest of our lives had turned into the beginning of a nightmare. And the worst thing was that I had no idea how we were going to wake up from it. The next morning dawned with palpable tension in the air. He had slept little, tossing and turning all night, trying to process the events of the previous day. Daniel, next to me, didn't seem to have rested much either. We looked at each other in silence, neither of us wanting to be the first to mention the elephant in the room, or rather, the mother-in-law in the house. "We should go down," Daniel finally muttered, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Mom will be waiting." I nodded, not trusting my voice to respond. We dressed in silence, each movement heavy with apprehension. As we walked down the stairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. For a moment, I could almost pretend that it was a normal day, that we were alone in our new house, starting our life together. But the illusion was shattered as soon as we entered the kitchen. Olivia was there, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stirring something in a frying pan. He turned when he heard us enter, an overly bright smile on his face. "Good morning, lovebirds," he exclaimed with an enthusiasm that seemed forced to me. "I hope you slept well. I'm making you breakfast." "Thank you, Mom," Daniel responded, his tone cautious. "But you didn't have to bother." "Nonsense," Olivia replied, waving a spatula in the air. "It's the least I can do for my hosts." I felt my stomach turn at the word hosts. This was our home, we were not its hosts. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. We sat at the table, the silence only interrupted by the sound of cutlery against plates. Olivia chatted happily, as if she didn't notice the tension in the air. "I was thinking," he said between bites, "that we should go shopping today. This house needs a mature feminine touch, don't you think?" I felt my blood boil. A mature feminine touch. What was that supposed to mean? Before he could respond, Daniel intervened. "Mom, I think we should talk about your stay here," he said, choosing his words carefully. Olivia put down her fork, her expression changing from joy to something more calculating. "Of course, honey. What do you want to know?" "Well, for starters, how long do you plan to stay?" Daniel asked. That's when Olivia dropped the bombshell that rocked my world even more. "Oh, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it was obvious. I'm staying permanently. In fact, I've already chosen my room." The fork I was holding fell from my hand, making a loud noise as it hit the plate. "What?" I managed to articulate. "I'm going to take the bigger room," Olivia announced casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "It has the best view of the garden and the closet is perfect for all my things." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Daniel, searching his eyes for any sign that this was a bad joke, but I saw only panic reflected in them. The same panic I felt growing in my chest. "Mom," Daniel began, his voice shaking slightly, "you can't just decide to stay here permanently. This is our house. Carmen and I bought it for ourselves." Olivia frowned, a look of confusion crossing her face. "But honey, didn't you tell me you were looking for a bigger place? I assumed it was so I could move in with you." I felt the air leave my lungs. Had Daniel told you that? When? Why hadn't he mentioned it to me? I didn't mean that, Mom," Daniel stuttered. "I just mentioned that we were looking for a bigger house because we wanted to start a family." Daniel's words were like a dagger in my heart. We had talked about having children, yes, but not so soon. And certainly not with his mother living with us. "Oh," Olivia said, her tone changing to one of disappointment. "I understand. I guess an old woman like me would only be a burden to you." "It's not that, Mom," Daniel tried to explain, but Olivia cut him off. No. I understand perfectly. I guess I'll have to find another place to live. Maybe a nursing home would be more appropriate for me." The manipulation was so obvious I almost laughed. Almost. But the guilty look on Daniel's face stopped me. I knew that look. It was the same one he used every time his mother made him feel guilty about something. "No one has said anything about an asylum, Olivia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But you have to understand that this situation is unexpected." Olivia looked at me as if she had just noticed my presence. "Oh, Carmen, dear. I forgot you were here. I guess this must be difficult for you, right? A daughter-in-law never wants to share her husband with her mother." I felt my patience running out. "It's not about sharing Daniel, Olivia. It's about you deciding to move into our house without consulting us." "Consult?" Olivia repeated, her tone turning cold. "Does a mother need to consult to live with her child? When that child is married and has his own life?" "Yes," I responded, my voice firmer than I felt. The atmosphere in the kitchen became tense, the air thick with unspoken emotions and pent-up resentments. Daniel looked like he was on the verge of breaking down, torn between his loyalty to me and his love for his mother. "Maybe we should all calm down," he suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can discuss this later, when we have had time to think." But Olivia wasn't about to drop the topic. He stood up from the table, his posture rigid and defiant. "There's nothing to discuss, Daniel. I'm your mother. I need a place to live. End of story." "Mom, please," Daniel begged. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it simple?" Olivia repeated, her voice rising. "Isn't it simple to take care of your mother? Or has your wife convinced you that you don't need me anymore?" I felt anger growing inside me. How dare she imply that I was keeping Daniel away from her? "This has nothing to do with me, Olivia," I said, standing up as well. "It's about respecting our space and our lives." Olivia turned to me, her eyes shining with a mix of anger and triumph. "Respect? Are you talking to me about respect when you're trying to kick your mother-in-law out onto the street?" "No one's kicking anyone out," I shouted, my patience finally exhausted. "We just want to understand why you suddenly need to live with us." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked at us both, his expression a mix of shock and fear. Olivia, for her part, looked like she had been slapped. He began, his voice shaking slightly. "I just wanted to be close to my family. Is that so terrible?" I felt a pang of guilt at the hurt tone in his voice, but I forced myself to hold my ground. "It's not terrible to want to be close, Olivia. But there are ways to do it without invading our space." Daniel finally seemed to find his voice. "Mom," he said softly, "we love you. But Carmen is right. We need our space. Maybe we could find a place nearby for you. What do you think?" Olivia looked at her son, her eyes filling with tears. "You too, Daniel? Would you rather see your mother living alone than have her around?" "It's not that, Mom," Daniel tried to explain, but Olivia was already leaving the kitchen. "It's okay," he said over his shoulder. "I understand when I'm not welcome. I'll leave today." And with that, he headed upstairs, leaving Daniel and me in an awkward silence. "Sorry," Daniel murmured after a moment. "I don't know what's wrong with her. I've never seen her act like that." She wanted to yell at him, tell him that her mother had always been this manipulative, that she was only now seeing it clearly. But the pained expression on his face stopped me. "You should talk to her," I said instead. "Find out what's really going on." Daniel nodded, grateful for my understanding. As I watched him walk up the stairs to talk to his mother, I couldn't help but wonder what we'd gotten ourselves into. Our new life together, our dreams for the future, everything seemed to be falling apart before it had even begun. I sat on the living room couch, surrounded by unpacked moving boxes, symbols of a life that already seemed distant. The sound of raised voices came from upstairs, but I couldn't make out the words. I just knew that whatever Olivia was saying was changing our lives forever. I closed my eyes, wishing I could wake up from this nightmare. But I knew this was just the beginning. The battle for our home, our life, and our future was just beginning. Minutes turned into hours as I waited in the living room, surrounded by moving boxes that now seemed to mock me. The sound of the argument upstairs had diminished to a muffled murmur, but the tension in the air was still palpable. Finally, I heard footsteps descending the stairs. Daniel appeared first, his face pale and drawn, followed by Olivia, whose eyes were red and swollen. "Carmen," Daniel said with a trembling voice, "I think we need to talk." I sat up straighter on the couch, preparing for whatever was to come. Olivia sat on the couch in front of me, while Daniel took a seat next to me, although maintaining a distance that did not go unnoticed. "You see," Daniel began, rubbing his hands nervously, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. Daniel looked at his mother, as if seeking support, before speaking again. "Mom thought we were renting this house temporarily, not buying it," he blurted out. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. I looked at Olivia, then at Daniel, and back at Olivia, trying to process what I had just heard. "How?" I finally managed to articulate. "How is that possible? We've been talking about buying this house for months." Olivia cleared her throat, her voice sounding unusually small as she spoke. "When Daniel told me they were moving to a bigger house, I assumed it was a temporary rental while they looked for something permanent, something that could accommodate us all." I felt anger bubbling inside me. "Accommodate us all? Olivia, we never talked about you living with us. Never." I know, Olivia said, waving a hand in the air. "It was a foolish assumption on my part. But understand, dear, when a mother hears that her son is moving to a bigger place, she naturally thinks of herself," I interrupted, unable to contain my frustration. "Not in what your son and daughter-in-law might want for their future." "Carmen," Daniel warned softly, but I ignored him. "No, Daniel. This is absurd. Your mother can't just assume she can move in with us without even asking us." Olivia sat up straight in her seat, a spark of her usual arrogance returning to her eyes. "Well, if my son had been clearer about his intentions, none of this would have happened." Daniel seemed to want to sink into the sofa. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have been more explicit about our plans. Do you feel it?" I asked, incredulously. "Daniel, you didn't do anything wrong. We didn't have to explain our life plans to anyone." Silence fell upon us again, heavy and uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something in Olivia's expression, a mix of embarrassment and fear. There was something else here, something they weren't telling us. "Olivia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "why did you really think you'd move in with us? And don't tell me it was just a guess." Olivia looked at Daniel, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Daniel nodded, as if giving him permission to speak. Olivia began, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm in trouble, Carmen. Financial problems." I felt my heart sink. Suddenly, everything was starting to make sense. The unexpected arrival, the insistence on staying, the choice of the biggest room. "What kind of financial problems?" I asked, although part of me was already afraid of the answer. Olivia took a deep breath before answering. "I'm on the brink of bankruptcy. I've lost almost everything." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. I looked at Daniel, searching for any sign of surprise on his face, but I saw only guilt. He knew it. He had known it all along. "Daniel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "did you know about this?" He nodded slowly, avoiding my gaze. "Mom told me a couple of months ago. She was trying to find a solution." I felt like my world was shaking. Not only had Olivia assumed she could move in with us, but Daniel had been hiding crucial information from me about our family situation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, the betrayal evident in my voice. "I didn't want to worry you," Daniel replied weakly. "I thought I could fix it." Olivia chimed in, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to be a burden on you. I thought that if I moved here, I could help with expenses, take care of the house." "Help with expenses?" I repeated, incredulously. "Olivia, you just said you're bankrupt. How are you going to help with expenses?" The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia looked down, her hands shaking slightly in her lap. "The truth is," he finally continued, "I was hoping you guys could help me. At least until I could get on my feet again." I felt like the room was spinning. Everything we had worked on, all our plans and dreams, were being threatened by this revelation. "How did this happen?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Olivia, I always thought you were, well, wealthy." Olivia gave a bitter laugh. "I was, my dear. I was. But bad investments, an expensive divorce, and some errors in judgment have led me to this situation." I looked at Daniel, searching for some explanation, some word of comfort, but he seemed as lost as I was. "And what do you expect us to do?" I finally asked, frustration evident in my voice. "We just bought this house. We have our own debts, our own plans." I know, Olivia said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I don't expect them to understand or forgive me for putting them in this situation. But I had no one else to turn to." Daniel finally found his voice. "Mom, you know we love you and we want to help you. But this is too much. We need time to process it, to think about our options." I nodded, grateful for Daniel's intervention. "Yes, this is not something we can decide in a moment. We need to talk, do the numbers, see what is possible and what is not." Olivia nodded slowly, wiping away her tears with a silk handkerchief. "I understand. I just ask you not to leave me on the street. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm still family." Olivia's words hung heavy in the air, loaded with implications and responsibilities she wasn't sure she was ready to take on. I looked at Daniel, searching for some sign of what to do next, but he looked as lost as I did. "We need a moment alone," I finally said, standing up. "Olivia, could you give us some space? Maybe you could rest in your room for a while." Olivia nodded, standing with a dignity that seemed out of place given the situation. As we watched her walk up the stairs, I felt the weight of reality fall on my shoulders. Once alone, I turned to Daniel, confusion and anger fighting for control over my emotions. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this secret?" Daniel buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled as he responded. "I'm sorry, Carmen. I really thought I could solve it without involving you. Without involving either of us. But we're a team, Daniel," I said, disappointment evident in my voice. "We're supposed to face these things together. How could you keep something so important from me?" I know, he murmured, looking up at me. "It was a mistake." I was scared, confused. I didn't know what to do. I sat next to him, initial anger giving way to deep concern. "What are we going to do now? We can't just throw your mother out on the street, but we can't keep her indefinitely either." Daniel shook his head, desperation clear in his eyes. "I don't know, Carmen. I really don't know. But we will find a solution. Together." As we sat there, in the middle of our half-unpacked living room, surrounded by boxes containing our hopes and dreams, I couldn't help but think about how we had gotten to this point. What should have been the beginning of our new life together had turned into a complicated tangle of family secrets and unexpected responsibilities. The sun was beginning to set outside, casting long shadows through the windows. Our first day in our new house was coming to an end, but instead of the joy and excitement we had anticipated, we were facing a crisis that threatened to derail everything we had worked for. I looked at Daniel, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between his love for me and his sense of duty to his mother. I knew the days and weeks ahead would be difficult, filled with uncomfortable conversations and painful decisions. But as I took his hand in mine, I also knew that we would face this together, for the sake of our future and that of our family. The misunderstanding about the house was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface lurked deeper, more complex problems that we would have to navigate. But for now, in that moment of stillness before the storm, we had each other. And he hoped that would be enough to face whatever came. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster. Daniel and I found ourselves caught in a whirlwind of difficult decisions, uncomfortable conversations, and family tensions. Olivia's presence in our home had become a constant reminder of the crisis we faced. One morning, while we were eating breakfast in awkward silence, I decided it was time to take the bull by the horns. "We need a plan," I said, breaking the silence. "We can't go on like this indefinitely." Daniel nodded, his face showing the accumulated fatigue of sleepless nights. "You're right. What do you suggest?" I took a deep breath before continuing. "I think we should sit down with your mother and have a serious conversation about her finances. We need to know exactly where she is and what options we have." Olivia, who had been listening silently, intervened. "I agree. I owe you a full explanation." That afternoon, we met in the living room. Olivia brought with her a folder full of documents, her face a mask of shame and resignation. "I guess I should start at the beginning," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It all started a few years ago, after the divorce." For the next 2 hours, Olivia told us a story of bad investments, overspending, and reckless decisions. He had invested much of his divorce settlement in a business that turned out to be a scam. Then, in a desperate attempt to recover what he had lost, he had turned to gambling. "I thought I could get it all back," she explained, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I only made things worse." Daniel and I listened in shock as Olivia detailed the magnitude of her debts. It was worse than we had imagined. Not only had he lost all his savings, but he also owed a considerable sum to various creditors. "Why didn't you tell us before?" Daniel asked, his voice a mix of pain and frustration. Olivia looked down, embarrassed. I was embarrassed. I always prided myself on my financial independence. I didn't want to be seen as a failure. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite my frustration. "Olivia, asking for help doesn't make you a failure. We are family." Daniel nodded, taking his mother's hand. "Mom, we love you. We would have liked to help you before things got to this point." Olivia sobbed softly, squeezing Daniel's hand. I know. I was a fool." We spent the next few hours reviewing Olivia's documents, trying to understand the magnitude of the problem and consider our options. The situation was serious, but not irremediable. "I think we need professional help," I finally said. "A financial advisor could help us come up with a plan to get out of this situation." Daniel nodded, relieved to have a course of action. "That's a good idea. We should also consider selling some of Mom's properties." Olivia shuddered at the thought, but nodded in resignation. "I guess I have no choice. I've been a fool to hold on to material things when my family is the most important thing." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We contacted a financial advisor recommended by a friend and began working on a plan to restructure Olivia's debts and sell some of her properties. Meanwhile, we had to face another uncomfortable reality. Our house wasn't big enough for the 3 of us long term. After many discussions and tears, we came to a difficult but necessary decision. "I think we should look for a bigger place," Daniel proposed one night. "Something that has a separate apartment or a guest house for Mom." The idea filled me with anxiety. We had just bought this house, it was our dream. But I knew Daniel was right. We needed a long-term solution that would allow us to help Olivia without sacrificing our privacy and future plans. "Okay," I finally agreed. "But on one condition. We need to set clear boundaries and realistic expectations with your mother." Daniel nodded, relief evident on his face. "Of course. We'll do this together, as a team." The conversation with Olivia about our plans was surprisingly easy. She seemed to have developed a new appreciation for our help and was willing to accept our terms. "I thank you so much," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I promise I'll do my best not to be a burden." The following months were a challenge. Between the search for a new house, the sale of the properties of Olivia, and the implementation of our financial plan, we barely had time to breathe. But little by little, things began to improve. We find a beautiful property on the outskirts of the city, with a main spacious house and a perfect guest house for Olivia. The sale of some of its properties allowed us to make a substantial initial payment, significantly reducing our mortgage. Olivia, meanwhile, seemed to have found a new determination. He began taking financial administration classes and found a part-time job as a consultant. Seeing her strive to improve her situation filled me with a new respect for her. The day of the move was bittersweet. While we packed the last boxes in our first house, I could not help feeling a stab of sadness. This house had been our dream, our beginning. But while I saw Daniel and Olivia working together, laughing and sharing memories, I realized that we were building something new and perhaps more valuable, a stronger and more united family. That night, sitting on the porch of our new house, with Olivia in his nearby house, Daniel took my hand. "Thank you," he said gently. "I know this is not what we plan, but I am grateful for how you have handled everything." I pressed his hand, feeling a wave of love and gratitude. We are a team, remember? In good times and in bad. While we looked at the sunset, I reflected on the path that had taken us here. It had been difficult, full of unpleasant obstacles and surprises. But he had also taught us valuable lessons about forgiveness, compassion, and the importance of the family. Our new life was not exactly as we had imagined, but somehow, it felt richer, more complete. And while the sun sank on the horizon, painting the sky of golden and pink tones, I felt a deep sense of peace and hope for the future. I knew we would still have challenges ahead. Olivia's financial recovery would take time, and learn to live together without stepping on our heels would be a constant adjustment process. But for the first time in months, I felt we were on the right path. I looked at Daniel, seeing in his eyes the same love and determination I felt in my heart. Together, we had faced a crisis that could have destroyed many couples. And together, we would build the future that we had always dreamed, even if it saw it a little different from what we had initially imagined. While the first stars began to shine in the night sky, I felt a deep gratitude for the lessons we had learned and by force we had discovered in ourselves and in our relationship. The road had been difficult, but it had taken us exactly where we needed to be. The months were flying as we adapted to our new life. Olivia's presence in the guest house had become an integral part of our daily routine, although not without his challenges. Despite our best efforts to maintain healthy limits, the line between independence and interdependence often blurred. One Sunday morning, while Daniel and I enjoyed a rare moment of tranquility in the garden, the sound of Olivia's door opening took us out of our peace. "Good morning, Tortolites," Olivia exclaimed, approaching with a newly baked cake tray. "I thought they would like to try my new recipe." I exchanged a look with Daniel. We appreciated the gesture, but these interruptions had become increasingly frequent. "Thank you, Mom," Daniel said, taking the tray. "But remember, we talk about respecting our space on Sundays in the morning." Olivia seemed to deflate a little. "Oh, true. I'm sorry, I got excited with the recipe and wanted to share it." I felt a stab of guilt to see his expression decayed. "Okay, Olivia. We appreciate the gesture. Maybe we could try them together during family lunch." His face lit at the suggestion. "That would be wonderful. I will prepare something special." While Olivia returned to her house, Daniel released a sigh. "It's hard, right? I want you to feel welcome, but sometimes I feel we are losing our privacy." I nodded, perfectly understanding his dilemma. Maybe we need to have another conversation about limits and expectations. That afternoon, during our family lunch, we decided to address the issue. After enjoying the delicious food prepared by Olivia, Daniel took the initiative. "Mom," began, his soft but firm voice, "Carmen and I want to talk to you about something important." Olivia left his fork, his expression becoming serious. "Is something bad happens?" "It's not bad," he intervenes, trying to maintain a reassuring tone. We just want to make sure we are all on the same page about our coexistence arrangements. During the next hour, we had a frank and sometimes uncomfortable conversation about limits, privacy, and mutual expectations. Olivia listened carefully, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning. "I understand that they need their space," he said finally. "It's just that, sometimes I feel alone. I miss someone to talk to, with whom to share the little things of day to day." His admission took us by surprise. We had been so concerned about maintaining our independence that we had not realized how isolated Olivia could feel. "Mom," Daniel said, taking his hand, "we don't want you to feel alone. We just need to find a balance that works for everyone." After a lot of discussion, we reached a new agreement. We established specific schedules for family visits and meals, but we also promised to include Olivia more in our daily activities. "We suggest that you look for social groups or hobbies that could help you build your own support network outside of us." The following months were a constant adjustment process. Olivia joined a local reading club and began taking painting classes, which gave him a new source of joy and company. For our part, Daniel and I strive to be more inclusive, inviting her walking through the park or watching movies together on weekends. However, our biggest challenge was yet to come. One afternoon, while checking the mail, I found an envelope aimed at me from the local hospital. With trembling hands, I opened it and read its content. My heart broke. I was pregnant. The news filled me with a mixture of emotion and anxiety. Daniel and I had talked about having children, but with everything that happened with Olivia, we had decided to wait. Now, the universe seemed to have other plans. That night, after Olivia retired to his house, gave Daniel the news. His face lit up with a radiant smile before a shadow of concern crossed his eyes. "It's wonderful," he said, hugging me strongly. "But how do you think our situation will affect Mom?" It was a valid question. Our family dynamic was already complicated, and a baby would certainly change things even more. "We will have to talk to her," I replied. "Be honest about how this will change things and establish new expectations." The conversation with Olivia turned out to be surprisingly positive. When we gave him the news, his eyes filled with tears of joy. "I'm going to be grandmother," he exclaimed, hugging both of us. "Oh, what a blessing!" However, as the initial emotion calmed down, we approached the practical aspects of the situation. "Olivia," I said gently, "you know we love you and appreciate your help. But with the baby on the way, we will need even more privacy and space." To our surprise, Olivia nodded. "I understand, dear. In fact, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to change my own apartment." His suggestion took us by surprise. "Mom, you don't have to leave," Daniel said. "This is your house too." Olivia smiled, taking our hands. "I know, and I thank you for all they have done for me. But I think it's time for me to stop again on my own feet. Besides, I will be a very busy grandmother soon. I will need my own space for all the toys and gifts. What do I plan to buy?" The following months were an activity whirlwind. Between preparing for the arrival of the baby and helping Olivia find a nearby apartment, we barely had time to breathe. But as the delivery date approached, I felt a deep sense of peace and realization. The day our daughter was born, Sophia, was the happiest of our lives. While I was holding it in my arms, with Daniel by my side and radiant Olivia of pride, I realized that we had created something beautiful from difficult circumstances. Olivia moved to her new apartment a week after Sophia's birth. Although he was just a few minutes away, his move marked the beginning of a new stage in our relationship. It was no longer a constant presence in our daily life, but a love grandmother who came to visit regularly. Looking back, I realized how much we had grown and learned in recent years. What began as a family crisis had become an opportunity to strengthen our ties, establish healthy limits, and redefine what meant being a family. While I rocked Sophia in my arms, with Daniel by my side and the sound of Olivia humming in the kitchen while preparing dinner, I felt a deep gratitude along the path that had taken us here. It had not been easy, but each challenge had made us stronger, wiser, and more united. Our family was not perfect, but it was ours. And while looking at my daughter's curious eyes, I knew that the future, with all her challenges and joys, would be an adventure that we would face together, with love, patience, and wisdom we had won along the way. The years flew, And before realizing, Sophia turned 5. Our little family had found a balance that worked for everyone. Olivia, now completely independent in her own apartment, had become a devoted grandmother and a welcome presence in our lives. However, fate had prepared a new challenge for us. An autumn afternoon, while Daniel and I enjoyed coffee in the garden, we received a call that would change our lives once more. "Daniel Martinez?" asked a serious voice across the line. "I am Dr. Ramirez from the Central Hospital. I fear that I have bad news about his father." The color left Daniel's face while listening to the doctor. His father, with whom he had a distant relationship for years, had suffered a severe stroke. I was alive, but I would need constant care. When Daniel hung the phone, his eyes were full of a mixture of shock and confusion. "My father," began, his voice breaking. "It's wrong. Very bad. The doctor says he can't live alone." My heart sank. He knew how complicated Daniel's relationship with his father, Roberto. After the divorce of his parents, Roberto had distanced himself, immersing himself in his work and letting the relationship with his son deteriorate. "What do you want to do?" I asked gently, taking your hand. Daniel shook his head, lost. "I don't know. We have just talked for years. But it's my father." The following days were a whirlwind of hospital visits, conversations with doctors and endless discussions about what to do. Roberto would need constant attention, and the options were limited: an elderly residence or home care. "I can't send it to a residence," Daniel said one night, after Sophia had gone to sleep. "I know that our relationship is not the best, but it is my father." I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew what was coming, and a part of me wanted to protest. We had just found our balance, and the idea of altering it again terrified me. But seeing the anguish in Daniel's eyes, I knew we had to do the right thing. "We can adapt the study for him," I finally suggested. "It is on the ground floor and has its own bathroom." Daniel's gratitude confirmed that he had made the right decision, however difficult it was. The next person we had to talk to was Olivia. We feared his reaction, considering his story with Roberto and divorce. To our surprise, Olivia surprised us with his understanding and support. "Roberto and I had our differences," he said when we told him the situation, "but it is still Daniel's father. If he needs help, we must be there for him." His maturity and compassion left me speechless. He had traveled a long way from the woman who had appeared at our door years ago. The following weeks were a frenzy of preparations. We convert the study into a suitable room for Roberto, we hired a nurse to attend to him during the day, and we prepare mentally and emotionally for the changes that would come. The day Roberto arrived home was tense and emotional. Seeing it in a wheelchair, emaciated and vulnerable, it was a shock for everyone. Sophia, too young to completely understand the situation, observed with curiosity this grandfather who barely knew. "Dad," Daniel said gently, pushing the wheelchair to the house. "Welcome home." Roberto, with half of the face paralyzed by the spill, managed to sketch a crooked smile. "Thank you, son," he murmured with difficulty. The first days were difficult. Roberto was a frustrated and often moody patient, struggling to accept his new reality. Daniel was debated between compassion and irritation, years of resentment mixing with a new sense of responsibility. One afternoon, while helping Roberto with his physical therapy, the old man broke into tears. "Sorry," he sobbed, the words coming out with difficulty. "I have been a bad father. I don't deserve this." Daniel was paralyzed for a moment, surprised by this vulnerability sample of a man who had always seemed so strong and imperturbable. Slowly, he placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "You're here now," he said gently. "That is what matters." That moment marked a turning point in his relationship. Little by little, father and son began to rebuild the bridges that had burned so long ago. The conversations, although difficult at first, became easier and more frequent. Olivia, to everyone's surprise, became an unexpected ally. He started visiting regularly, helping Roberto's therapies and offering a company. Seeing my in-laws, once so bitter with each other, finding a common land in his new reality, was a lesson of forgiveness and growth. Sophia, with the innocence and curiosity of her age, became a source of joy for Roberto. His daily visits to grandfather's room, full of imaginative stories and colorful drawings, seemed to illuminate even the darkest days of the old man. However, not everything was easy. There were days when the tension in the house was palpable. The stress of caring for a sick relative, combined with the demands of our work and the raising of Sophia, often led us to the limit. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Daniel and I sat on the porch, exhausted. "Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing," Daniel admitted in a low voice. "It's so hard." I took his hand, perfectly understanding his conflict. "I know. But look how much your relationship with him has changed. And how he has joined our family in ways that we never imagine." It was true. Despite the challenges, there was a new depth in our family relationships. Olivia and Roberto, once adversaries, now shared a bond based on forgiveness and mutual understanding. Daniel was healing ancient wounds with his father, and Sophia was growing in an atmosphere of love and compassion. As the months passed, our new normality began to take shape. We learned to balance everyone's needs, to communicate better and to support each other in difficult times. A spring afternoon, while the whole family was gathered in the garden, watching Sophia play with her grandfather Roberto, I realized how much we had grown up. What initially seemed an impossible burden had become an opportunity for love, forgiveness, and redemption. I looked at Daniel, seeing in his eyes the same astonishment and gratitude that I felt. Our family, with all its imperfections and challenges, had become something beautiful and resistant. We had learned that true love not only resists storms, but is strengthened with them. While the sun put on, staining the sky of gold and pink tones, I felt a deep peace. I knew that we would continue to face challenges, that there would be difficult days ahead. But I also knew that, together, we could overcome anything. Our house, once a symbol of our individual dreams, had become a testimony of the power of family love. It was a shelter not only for us, but for all those who needed healing and second opportunities. And while I saw Sophia laugh, Roberto smiles, Olivia chatted animatedly with Daniel, I knew we had built something beautiful. It was not the life we had planned, but it was beautiful in its own unique and unexpected way. Time followed its inexorable course, and before realizing it, Sophia was celebrating her 10th birthday. The last decade had been a whirlwind of joys, challenges and growth for our family. Roberto, against all prognosis, had shown remarkable improvement in his condition, although he still needed constant care. Olivia had become a comforting and stable presence in our lives, and our little Sophia grew more curious and compassionate every day. However, fate had prepared a new test for us. A spring morning, while we all had breakfast together, Daniel received a call that would change our lives once again. "Daniel Martinez?" asked a voice on the other side of the line. "I am Javier Lopez, of Global Innovations. We have a proposal that we believe will be interested." I saw how Daniel's face went from curiosity to surprise and then to a mixture of emotion and concern. When he finally hung, he turned to me with an expression that I could not decipher. "Carmen," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "they have offered me a position at the company's headquarters in New York. It's an incredible opportunity." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia, who had been chatting animatedly about her birthday plans, suddenly shut up, feeling the tension in the air. Olivia and Roberto exchanged worried looks. "New York," I finally articulate. "But, what about all this? Of our life here?" Daniel ran a hand through the hair, a gesture that I recognized as a sign of his nervousness. I know it. It's crazy. But it's the opportunity of my life. Salary, benefits. We could give Sophia a first-class education. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and discussions. At night, after Sophia went to sleep, Daniel and I spent hours debating the pros and cons of the move. "Think of the opportunities we would have there," Daniel argued. "Culture, museums, the experiences we could offer to Sophia. But what about our family here?" I replied. "What about your father? Of your mother? They have passed us." The decision weighed on us as a dark cloud. We knew that any choice we made would have huge consequences for all involved. It was Sophia who, without knowing it, gave us the perspective we needed. One night, while he wrapped her, looked at me with her big brown eyes and asked, "Mom, Why are all so sad lately? I sighed, looking for the right words to explain the situation to a 10-year-old girl. You'll see, darling, Dad have offered a very important job in another city, far from here. We are trying to decide if we should move. Sophia frowned, processing the information. But what will happen to Grandfather Roberto and Grandma Olivia? And my friends from school? His concern for others, even in a situation that would affect her deeply, moved me. I realized that, in our concern for the future, we had underestimated the impact that this decision would have on our daughter. I don't know, honey, I admitted. It's a very difficult decision. Sophia was silent for a moment, and then said something that left me breathless. Do you know? The other day, the teacher told us about the families of some children who come from other countries. He said that sometimes families have to separate for work or for other reasons, but that does not mean that they want to love each other. The wisdom of his words hit me strongly. She had been so worried about keeping our family united physically that she had forgotten that the ties that united us were much stronger than the geographical distance. That night, I shared the conversation with Daniel. Together, we conclude that we needed to include the whole family in this decision. We couldn't take it alone. The following weekend, we organize a family reunion. Sophia, Roberto, Olivia, Daniel, and I sat in the living room, the atmosphere loaded with anticipation and nervousness. We have been thinking a lot about this opportunity in New York, Daniel began. And we have realized that we cannot make this decision alone. It affects all of us. Roberto, who had been unusually silent, was the first to speak. Son, he said, his strongest voice than he had heard in years, you can't reject this opportunity for us. We have made many mistakes in the past, your mother and me, but we will not allow you to sacrifice your future for taking care of us. Olivia nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Roberto is right. They have done so much for us. It's time for you to think about you, Sophia. I was surprised by the strength and generosity of his words. These two, who once had been so absorbed in their own problems, were now putting the needs of their son and granddaughter above their own. But what will happen to you? Daniel asked, his voice broken by emotion. Dad, you still need care. It was then that Olivia surprised us all. I can take care of Roberto, he said with determination. We have been talking. I think we could live together again, help each other. The silence that followed this statement was broken by Daniel's incredulous laugh. You two, living together? After all? Roberto smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated his face marked by the years and the disease. Life is too short to hold on to old grudges, son. Your mother and I have learned that in the difficult way. I looked at Sophia, who had been listening to everything carefully. What do you think, honey? I asked. She bit her lip, thoughtful. I think it could be an adventure, he said finally. And, in addition, the teacher says that now we can talk and see each other every day, even if we are far. His optimism and adaptability filled me with pride and hope. I looked at Daniel and saw in his eyes the same mixture of emotions that I felt: gratitude for the support of our family, sadness for imminent separation, and emotion for the possibilities that opened before us. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations. Enter the sale of the house, the organization of the move, and the arrangements for the care of Roberto and Olivia. We barely had time to process the enormous change we were about to experience. The day of the game came too soon. We all gathered at the airport, the eyes full of non-spilled tears. Remember, said Olivia, hugging each one, this is not a goodbye. It's a see you later. Roberto, sitting in his wheelchair, took Daniel's hand. I'm proud of you, son, he said in a hoarse voice. See and conquer the world. While we approached the plane, with Sophia jumping with emotion between us, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. We were leaving behind the home we had built with so much effort, but we had with us the love and support of our family. While the plane took off, taking us to an uncertain future but full of possibilities, I realized that our family had overcome its most difficult test. We had learned that true love does not know distances, that the family is more than a physical place, and that sometimes, to grow, we need to have the courage to release. New York was waiting for us, with its imposing skyscrapers and its bustling streets. It was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, one that we would write together, with the love and strength we had cultivated over the years. And while the lights of the city that we left behind faded in the distance, I felt a deep gratitude for everything we had lived and learned. Our family, with all its imperfections and challenges, had prepared us for this moment. We were ready to face what came, knowing that, regardless of the distance, we would always be united by ties stronger than any ocean or continent. The future was uncertain, but we were together. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.